What kind of approvals are from the builder's side, and what should be the buyer be wary of?
So what happened was the government at that point in time or any point in time would always want to regularize the land mass which has population. The entire India cannot have a single regulation purely because
South of Chennai was all mangroves. Bombay, a lot of it is revolved around coast and creek, and again some amount of mangroves. Bangalore probably is agricultural property.
West Coast city is not equal to a East Coast or a central city. Not check at the end from a supervising point from the government. But now FSI is having certain sort of regulations. One is the road width, the second is the setback, and the third is
what basis that these FSIs get determined? What is the breaking point after which the FSI becomes sort of skewed and so on? Hello, good morning, and welcome to yet another episode of Reality.Club podcast. In the last two episodes, we have been discussing about the regulatory aspects around the ecosystem. And today, we're going to take one critical aspect of it, which is the beginning of everything when it comes to any relations that happen within the industry, which means where the starting point of the buyer would transpire on. We are going to discuss about the approvals, and all of us have gone through the process. And to begin with, how this process is shaped up and how we will have to evolve the system. These are all a few freewheeling conversations that we will be discussing and debating about. And we have had quite a few investments, and we have made quite a few investments as well. And as a builder, or as a builder marketer, we have seen a lot of transactions that happen seeking approvals. We have seen the process up close from both sides of the party. And there are a lot of things to be addressed. There are a lot of things to be educated as well. So on that note, let's take this conversation forward.
Sure. Yeah, Balaji, this is a topic I like a lot because I've been fascinated about it right from my childhood. So Arun knows this. I've had the good fortune in my house that my mom, when she was a bank employee, right from the early 80s, or I think, yeah, not late 70s, early 80s, like it was a very bank employee thing to do, that they used to, like, they used to socially pool knowledge about residential plots, and like frugally invest in like plots. This has, I think, I mean, at least in South and Tamil Nadu, I've seen a lot of this. Maybe this is the case in the North as well. So we were fortunate to buy a few small residential plots, which later kind of became a very good source of retirement kitty for my parents when we disposed them off after a few decades. So typically over the life cycle, we have seen all kinds of these approval tags to these plots, like unapproved plots, and then some of these over time becoming panchayat approved, and then becoming DTCP approved, or like corporation approved, right? And obviously each when each of these layers moved across, we used to feel that sense of security or better valuation for the property. There are properties which even after 20-30 years my mom disposed of, which didn't get approval. So they always had that stepbrotherly treatment. They were always low valued. There was always the risk of being taken back by government. So starting from plots, I want to ask Arun, what does this approval mean? What level of security or still lack of security non-approved, a panchayat approved, or a corporation approved plot comes? And then obviously the game changes a lot when you upgrade into a apartment or a villa. So what kind of approvals are there for those from the builder side, and what should be the buyer be wary of, and what should the builder and broker strive for when it comes to approvals from the authorities for any residential unit, whether it's plot or apartment or villa?
it's a very, very large topic. That's all I could first immediately think of. I think where probably we can start somewhere from top down. That's what my brain is saying, so that we could address the entire hierarchy itself, which is the just and also to connect to what probably we spoke in the last episode was that we spoke about those three just last before episode was the three evolution of market, right? Which is the ownership itself of real estate, the elite ownership, middle income ownership, and now it's going to get decentralized further, or inclusiveness is going to go further with digitization, right? If you see this, let's call this as past, present, and future. If you see in these aspects, these are the ownership which exist in the market per se, right? And all these point in time, what happened was there has to be on the other side there was the governance angle to the entire ownership, uh, right? So the government at elite ownership level, they didn't have much to regulate, right? There were few owning real estates compared to the entire land mass, and there were very much non-occupied land masses in most of the many places probably today have population, right? So so what happened was government at that point in time, or any point in time, would always want to regularize the land mass which has population. That is where it all starts, right? So that's why if you see the tribal areas are not, I mean, it's called as something very a forest driven deforestation, I mean, more of an unreserved area, right? So we call it, I mean, government itself, if you see in the land mass, they call this as unrestricted, or I mean uncharted territory and things like that. So that's how it's.
That's more reserved, by the way.
Yeah. Yes. So all that's how it starts. Just imagine this as a platter of earth, right? Our earth or any geography per se. This is how it would be, right? From this, what happens? The human tend to occupy and then probably start cultivating, and that's where the agricultural portion or the yeah, I mean, people tend to live some places where they could basically cultivate. This is how it progressed, right? The evolution of population. So that's where the from any land it became to something called as, okay, cultivatable land and a non-cultivatable land, and probably those cultivation was predominantly to do with the abundance of water and the minerals, right? This is how it was more likely. So what happened from the land masses? This segregation started happening. So in the past, governments were predominantly focused on just demarcating as, hey, these are places which probably industries come, or these are places where certain minings could happen, and these are the places. So these are the large category with which government wanted to regularize or demarcate, right? Then that's when the middle income starting to own, right? What happened was everywhere there is a boom of housing, right? Around commercial activity of these parcels, you need population to work and get occupied as home. Near agriculture, there was a different dynamics, and a normal land or dry lands had, say, different perspectives of things. So now government started. I mean, this was a burst, right? This was burst of, because you didn't know where it was booming, right? Where populations were migrating, where they were occupying, which property. So it was purely driven by demand. This middle income group or the current dynamics went into a point of pure. This is, I'm talking about last 20 to, I mean 30, 40 years I'm talking about, right? So this 30, 40 years is was the zero to what today in terms of middle income occupying properties for the sake of their own self individual wealths, right? Middle income ownerships. So when that happened is where regularization started evolving, right? The government wanted to just not, it is not good enough to just demarcate and say that, hey, this is where it is. They also had a perspective of controlling and tuning every regulation to the tune of population itself, right? The density of population. So, for instance, a city itself initially would have attraction towards certain places of commercial activity to begin with. But slowly, what happens? Those commercial activity, when it becomes costly because of the demand, it starts expanding in concentric circles, right? From that point. So when that happens, the government would always want it to settle down. They won't react to a point where, hey, okay, this is the commercial and this is the point, because no government would know as to whether that commercial activity is going to become a hub or not, right? Which is basically determined by a market. So any commercial activity to become a hub of population or the residential or middle income group ownership, it would take certain level of maturity, right? Today, if you see, this is where your mother generation or our parents' generation were owning properties which were yet to be tagged by the government. There were places of properties which were still traded, right, amongst people, because just nearby of the value, lower value, people were trading, and government didn't bother to notice it, because the trade or the transaction, the number of transactions which could happen to that particular land parcel or the unit home is very limited, right? Every transaction would be every 10 years or 20 years for a particular property. When would government start acting on it is when, hey, if the same property is getting moved from one hand to the other, traded from one person to the other very frequently, right, within years, within 15 years, that's when the dynamic starts working. I mean, there is one portion of putting a stamp duty and things like that, so that regulation checks the price. And also government wants to know whether, hey, is too much population moving in this area, is demand supply, is it right, or is it bursting? Because of that, government has to prepare in terms of public works, right? The roads, the rails, the other infrastructure, which population explosion should not happen. So as this is happening, right? So this is what it is. So that as this has happened, the new, at least in the latest stage, if you see in Tamil Nadu, at least I could say, because this is not common, right? Why am I giving this long story? Is that the entire India cannot have a single regulation purely because of this framework, right? Because certain parcel of states or certain states are not as developed as certain states, right? Not urbanized as certain states, which means population migration is not that evenly poised in every state, or within state.
Even if you take the biggest cities of India, right, and their growth chart over 30, 40 years, what was kind of the outskirts, I mean, not even the city and then the outskirts, and now they have had their own unique challenges. Chennai, south of Chennai was all mangroves. Bombay, a lot of it is revolved around reclamation and coast and creek, and again some amount of mangroves. Bangalore probably is agricultural property, like outside. Calcutta again, like some amount of like I don't know, basin delta, or I mean, again there the river joins the sea, and there is agree also. So each, and the period of growth also has been very different, right? Some cities, the outer suburbs developed in the 80s, some in the 90s, some in the 2000s. So as I said, it's very very unique and specific, their nature of problems and period of urbanization. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So this is what primary which we need to understand, that that's why there is so much of dynamics which varies from state to state, and it is state governed one. And even within state government, no city is same. Within, I mean, no one city distribution or costing or dynamics is no different from the other, right? That's the beauty of real estate. At the same time, that's the complexity of regulation. The governments of government as
Can
a.
you repeat once, Arun? Can you repeat after what I said after my statement? Because I think you froze for a bit. Yeah.
So basically, what I was saying was, what you said is absolutely right. I mean, this is the unique perspective of India, right? I mean, there's no two states which is same. There's no two cities within a state are same, right? Within a city, no two good hubs are same, right? In many dynamics, because certain similar. I mean, West Coast city is not equal to a East Coast city, right? Or a central city of India. So there are geographical dimensions to it. So and there could be guards which were go away, go in between. There are rivers, natural perspectives. So the government of the order have to just not check on the population, and but also on the natural resources of it, and also they also are in a position to decide as to where the population have to be migrated or would allow migration. These are very, very broad. So, which is what town planning or the corporation planning is all about, right? So, that's where if you see this corporation planning, town planning has been evolved, and that determines the smart investors or developers watch, right? Say they always keep a watch on how the corporation limits are, right? Typically, you see when you come, you wanted to know about that plot, right? Typically, we tend to say that, hey, this has come to a corporation limit, this area, right? That would be a buzzword among the sales of plots, right? Or this would probably come into corporation limit, right? Those, yeah, is a certain landmass which has just come into corporation limit, or in next 5 years something which would probably come into corporation limit, are the potential sales point for plots, right? So this is how it starts. So why this is one, and why our previous generation were able to get something without a government tag called pata or kata in few places or whatever it is was that for that reason. Today, at least most of the states, most of the cities in India, which are very well, because of the population explosion and the quantum of population which they have, they are able to clearly say that, hey, in this place or in this state, you cannot have a land parcel with you, however big, small it is, without a pata, which means without me recognizing it as a property which is owned by you as a dry land, or as a X land, or as a Y land, right? As an agriculture, as a wet land or a dry land, or whatever may be the categorization, right? So that much of maturity has come. So because the government has started to acknowledge all the geographies under, basically tag all the geographies, now ownership could be with anybody, right? So once government knows that, okay, hey, I have mapped the entire geography of my state or city end to end, right? Because there are few places governments may not even gone on to understand, right? Because there is no population, there is nothing much out there, there is no roads, there is no access to anything. So there, you need not even go, and basically government has no real need to do it today. Maybe they would do it later. That's how they left it that day. But today, because of the population explosion, this tend to happen, and that's why between our generation, our parents to our generation itself, we have seen a huge regulation, huge mapping of land, right? This has happened. So this is the so-called pata or tagging of land with the government. So once there is a pata land,
2014, just to add to that, 2014 or 12, I think, is like when we bought a last transaction, and to now I see a sea amount of change, like in digitization, in formalization, and they literally they do charge a little more at the government side, like even for fees and stuff, but then the level of professionalism and digitization is like much better in a state like Tamil Nadu. Obviously, again, different states have different levels of sophistication here, but I think as one of the better performing states and more industrialized states, there's sea change in the last 5 to 10 years in the level of digitization.
absolutely. And this
Yeah, sorry. This is how they have made a little bit of a transformation where cities will have a separate body or a separate department. In Chennai, it's CMDA, and for every region, especially when it comes to city which grows at a faster rate, will have a separate department, while the other parts of the state will have its own district administration that comes under the purview of a planning commission that is being taken care of. However, this micro regulation is something which is inevitable in the real estate industry, given the kind of various dynamics within one state or even within one city and a district coupled together. Let's take Coimbatore for example. There is a rural part of it and there is an urban part of it as well. For the urban part, the dynamics are different. For the rural part, the dynamics are different. The way you would invest in a property and so on. So the approval dynamics, unfortunately, in my opinion, is not something that we can standardize for a certain geography altogether in a larger scale. So, to opine on this and also to ask yet another question to you, what is the way with which the regulatory bodies can actually circumvent?
Yeah. No, they are moving in the direction. You are going to see that in this decade, definitely, because there's definitely going to be a single window system for approvals. I'm sure about it. Most of the places it is there, but for certain. I mean, let me first categorize and say that we're from what level I'm talking. So we spoke about at large from the town planning level so far, right? So let's now barge into the buyer side of things, which is residential plots and homes, right? From this context, if you dive into that, there are two things. One is plots, and another is homes, right? So a plot developer basically accumulates certain parcel of land or buys a huge part of land. He goes on to dissect it into small pieces and then sells it, right? This is plot development. On the other side, a home or a apartment or a villa or a cluster development, residential base, again similar land parcel, instead of just dividing it as a plot, land parcel, they go and develop it as a one whole project or a cluster development. In this cluster, it could be a combination of 100% villa or a 100% apartment or a hybrid apartment, row house, villa, whatever it is. So these are the two ideas with which a developer would see a land parcel first, right? So with these two ideas, what he has to do is he has to go to a government. He would want to sell. So just to regulate this idea or thought process or the creativity of the developer itself, the government, what they do or is that they want to regulate in a streamline that, okay, hey, developer, you could think however, we have no problem. But the point is that everything has to be determined by certain factors, right? So what it is that, okay, this land parcel, what is the access road to that property, right? Irrespective of the land mass, what is the road access to the property? This is first point, right? If the road access is 30 feet and the land parcel is 30 acres, right? Just imagine if how much of cars and bikes or population which could fly on that 30 feet road to enter into that 30 acres. Just imagine that. So that is what government want to regulate. So that's where the road access comes into play, right? If the same 30 acre has a 100 feet road, let's assume, right? Then that means it could probably take more population at one at a single point in time, right? So these are the two dynamics with which things starts revolving, right? Okay. So the same 30 acres, let's assume it has about 60 feet road, it has certain dynamics. 30 feet road, it has certain dynamics. 100 feet road, it has certain dynamics, and 200 feet road, it has certain other dynamics, right? So, and there is something, next something is called as FSI, right? Assuming you are just want to build something for cluster, the floor space index, which means assuming x is the square feet land area, you could go up to probably 1.5 times, right? In most of the places, that's the default, I would say. At minimum, any cluster development could go with additional of few FSIs there, here premium FSIs, and there are exceptions which would go up to 1.8, right? There are scenarios which could go there. So just imagine there is 1,000 square feet of land parcel and I can build how much? 1,500 square feet by default with approval, right? If it is say 1 lakh square feet of land parcel, I can go to 1.5 lakh square feet of land parcel on top, right? In terms of 3 lakh square feet land parcel, I can go to almost 4.5 lakh square feet of land parcel. So this is how the FSI is, right? So which
Huge
means,
topic, huge topic and favorite topic in MMR region, like is FSI. Like in real estate and Bombay, you are not going to speak for 5 minutes without mentioning FSI, because especially when it comes to redevelopment, right, which is a big thing, right? Redevelopment is a huge thing impacting so many people from time to time in Bombay, so or Mumbai, sorry, but they would kind of move from their current place to like a temporary place, and their old apartment complex gets redeveloped. There is always a tug of war between developers and the system to kind of get the FSI improved, so that they get more space and then they get more value for money. Also, it becomes an incentive for people vacating, so that they get typically a bedroom more or more square footage when they come out and come back, right? So their value improves, and the builder also gets more space. Yeah. So
absolutely. So based on this FSI, the FSI tend to differ, or premium FSI or anything above this bare minimum 1.5 FSI is possible for few exceptions, which government would encourage the developer to have. Exceptions like, okay, you have to build X number of EWS. If you do that, that's great. Then if you could do this, then I will give you that, right? And if you are very closer to say C shore, right, then I can't give you so much FSI. This reason, right? So there are like this way across geographies, the government has framed the parameters for FSI, and based on this FSI, the developer's creativity starts working, right? The potential to commercialize that land parcel what he has, right? So this is the first point. Second point is that having understood an FSI, the developer or the dynamics how it works is that, okay, he should not develop end to end, right? See, okay, just because I could do 1,500 square feet or 1,000 square feet, I can't go on to do. Just imagine on the road, I have a window, and on the road, I have the gate of my rear gate, right? That's not right, correct? Why it is not? It is because just imagine for the sake of public water drainage, and there is a space for parking. There has to be a space for emergencies like fire accidents and things like that, where the fire engine has to come into the house and then probably go around the property to take those actions, right? So you to consider what there is something called a setback again. So the FSA is not just sacrosanct, right? So within the property, they would there is something called a setback which has to be given. Setback is nothing but the leeway of emptiness which you have to leave it in front, rear, and back of your property, right? So there is a setback dynamics. So what I said was, one is FSI. Based on FSI, people start thinking, but FSI is having certain sort of regulations. One is the road width, the second is the setback, and the third is the height of the entire property itself, right? So these are the bare minimum things which they see, right? So that this they gave, and if you see our builders or our previous regime, at least 5-6 years back, at least in Tamil Nadu, because I'm coming from Tamil Nadu, I can vouch is that there was nothing called as completion certificate from the government, which means, okay, you've come with the right combination of road width, setback, and height with a beautiful design of yours, however it could be, with X number of kitchens. Okay, so basically, from the approval side, what government tend to see is that, okay, how many kitchens are there? Kitchen is equal to that many number of families. Okay, that's all it is. So many kitchens means so many people, which means this road with X number of family with this setback and this height, yes, it could survive, right? This is how the government or a approval team sitting in office tend to decide, right? After deciding that, even they allow the a developer to go towards the consent of the local panchayat, consent at a fire department, consent at a water department, consent at TNEB department. All of these people have to consent. Yeah, electricity department. All of these people have to give a environmental for certain places. They all give additional inputs, and all of these things are pooled and collected along with the creativity of the development or the cluster development and presented to the approval. Now the approval having approver, the government regulator, sees and says that okay, great, I give you time of say X period, say 3, 5, 6 years to finish this property, and I give you a building approval, right? For development there is a separate approval, for a plot there is a separate approval, right? So I'll get, so which means from a raw land, a pata land, you have to go get a land approval and then go on to sell it as a landed or a plotted property. If you, from the land parcel, you could directly go to the approval team and say that, hey, I don't want to do land, I would like to directly to a government. And so you get a direct approval or a consent on that from the building approval and given. For building alone, there is always a time period for approvals, okay, which means there is a 5 year period or a 7 year period or a 3 year period, depends on the size and magnitude of it, which the government gives him to finish. If there are possibility of lapse of approval, I mean the time period, and then you won't be able to basically finish, then you have to go back, have it extended, and that's when you could finish, right? So this was the time. Only now of late there is something called as completion certificate. Previous ways, this approval or this parameters is given one shot, and there was no check at the end and chapa at the end from a supervising point from the government. But now there is something called as completion certificate, which means after 5 years, when the builder or the developer says that I have completed, the government staff comes to the point and cross check and gives a completion certificate, saying that this is in line with the design what was submitted to us, in line with the height, in line with the setback, in line with everything, and he gives a completion certificate. On completion certificate only, with the completion certificate only, a TNEB acts to give a electricity connection to that property. Water comes and gives you water connection. The drainage comes and does the drainage work today, right?
Yeah.
So this is how
Even I am aware in my own personal circles where for individual residential houses in some areas, the government started cracking down on ground plus 2 and said you can only do ground plus 1. And then people would quietly sneak in and build ground plus 2 and say that, hey, sorry, this is a deviation from the plan. Can you please approve this exception? And kind of, I don't want to use indicting words, but then push papers through the system and get it approved. I think nowadays it's not possible anymore. Like if you are allowed this much, you're only allowed this much.
But see that exceptions government were allowing purely because of the
Yeah. I have a quick question to you, sorry. On what basis that these FSIs get determined? I mean, we were talking about the regulatory aspects. We were talking about the road size versus the area and so on. Is it 1.3, 1.4? What is the minimum threshold and what is the maximum threshold? What is the breaking point after which the FSI becomes, sort of skewed and so on? When it comes to high rise, you have FSI which is totally skewed for a certain land parcel. On what basis these ratios come?
No. See, basically, FSI, when you see high rises, at least in India, it is not a blind high rise. Have you seen a high rise in India, which is probably 50 floors commonly everywhere? It's it's only it's uncommon basically, right? 50 floors, 100 floors, just similar to, I mean, whatever we see in foreign countries, we won't be able to see it here because there is no such land mass first. Okay. Why am I saying land mass? Is FSI is proportional to the land mass, which means how much ever height you would like to go, that much of setback you have to leave. That you need to understand. Okay, it's not enough. Okay, I have X land parcel. I could go on to get an FSA of 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, and then just leave a 10 feet in front and could go height. No, it's not possible. If you, how much ever you're going on top, that much of setback is going to be there around you within your property. It's not on the road or public property, right? So how much of setback? That's why you see Hiranandani property is high rise, because he could definitely go on to give you a space around. Today, if you see most of the high rise properties of 9 floors to 12 to 18 floors, this is a typical range, right? Maximum, like about 9 should be the typical starting range to going up to 18. Below 9, it's typically G plus 4, right? That's how it would be in my understanding. Is that why these are parameters is purely because of the regulation, right? See, that's where regulation comes in, which means you need to have a 200 feet road, right? To have certain FSI, and to have such an FSI and height, you need to have so much setback. If you have to leave so much setback, the land parcel has to be massive. Where will you have that bigger road access with few acres, few hundred acres, I would say, to go for a setback of say 50, 100 plus feet, then you go up top, right? So that's why, from a lay person, we think that okay, hey, anybody could, as long as people have money, and as long as somebody has an acre, they could go on to build something like a this the tallest building in the region. No, that's not possible. That's not possible. It's not. It doesn't work like that, right? So it is purely regulated. The FSI is very skewed in this perspective. This I gave it from the development perspective. There is a town planning also which gives you aspects, right? That's where the town planning is different from approvals, right? Approvals go by. I missed it, right? See, for approval, there is something called a soil test by default, right? So based on soil test only, the government will approve the structural foundation of a building, because the builder, when he's actually submitting a plan, he has to get an authorized architect and authorized structural engineer to sign on the plan and then only submit. After that, there is a proven structural engineer from the government side to cross check that and say whether this foundation is okay, approved in this geography of soil test, because they have a survey done by from themselves, right? They have traced their and that's what we call it as survey numbers and things like that, right? For lands. So that is government side of survey. For that survey number, they know what sort of land it is and what sort of soil it is and what sort of possible foundation they are. So that template government will have. That template is what the architect and structural engineer would invariably get into. Even if they have to innovate certain things, that is the framework within which they could innovate. Right? Any designs are within the framework, any structural brilliance is within the framework, any material which is used new are all well within this framework. Right? So yeah, so these are that's why with such low entry barrier to become a developer, see the amount of quality of see the amount of quality what we could maintain as residential, right? We are still able to trust a newbie who's building a 4 floors, new developer building a 4 floors and buy a property and still go stand on the third floor, right? We all go into a mall with confidence, right? Why? It's because there are government regulations and aspects are very strong in many sense. This is a very proven time tested model. So that has given a lot of brilliance. Of course, there's very meager amount of culprits which are there, which would be less than 0.000001% of the entire market, which always would exist, right? So those can't be the norm, and that will never be. That's why we're not worried about which building to get into. We don't check whether the building is done by XR structural engineer. That's when I will step my foot in. These are not the fears which we have, right?
Yeah. even with public structures like bridges and highways and roads, it's come down. It's not eliminated, but this whole stories of falling down or crashing has drastically come down over decades.
Most importantly, as you're saying this, I could recall is that the town planning level they will also consider the seismic zones, the earthquake prone zones, non-earthquake prone zone. What is it? So those are the overall broader surveys also in place. If it is earthquake, fortunately, most importantly, as you're saying this, I could recall is that the town planning level they will also consider the seismic zones, the earthquake prone zones, non-earthquake prone zone. What is it? So those are the overall broader surveys also in place. If it is earthquake, fortunately, India doesn't fall predominantly into most of the earthquake zones. But having said that, there is a seaside, there is marshlands, there are various lands, wetlands, and things like landmass plus seismic aspect of it, overall global warming perspective of it, mining perspective, commercial perspective, all these things are done at a town planning level. They give from a template and that is given to the bureaucrats at the approval level to go on to check at this minuscule level. That
Yeah.
template can't be blindly changed.
Sure, sure. Okay. I think it's a good note to kind of square off today's discussion along with like this whole aspect of town planning giving approvals based on so many geological, geographic, and ecological factors. We will probably proceed further around this and deeper. Probably take the apartment as a case and figure out what are the specific approvals or stages or the stilts as they call it that a builder goes through, right? I mean the word stilt is very very common, right? So stilt, elevation, and all of that. So yeah, each stage and approval we will walk through in the subsequent episodes. Thanks Arun, and thanks Balaji for the very informative session.
Yeah, thanks, team. Yeah, cheers.
Thank you. Bye.